Well, thank you everyone for joining this. And I am so glad to be on this call today with some of my colleagues from the West Coast, the best coast. You're going to hear from Senators Wyden and Padilla and our West Coast ports. We are here to sound the alarm on Trump's disaster of a trade policy with some of the ports that we represent, because the window of opportunity we have to minimize the worst consequences of this inane tariff agenda is rapidly shrinking. I want to be clear what's happening here. One economically illiterate president is forcing a totally unpredictable and thoughtless trade war onto the entire world. And although Trump inherited a remarkably strong and resilient American economy, he is single-handedly pushing this nation towards a painful Republican recession while forcing a tax increase on everyone. All of the major economic indicators are there. We're talking about big red flashing sirens. We went from months of strong economic growth and predictions of more growth to come to a shrinking economy, all thanks to Trump and his tariffs. Consumer confidence is at its lowest level since COVID because it's pretty obvious Trump is driving the economy into the ground on purpose. Small businesses in my state who rely on imports are telling me the situation is as dire for them as it was during COVID. During COVID, they're actually calling Trump's trade war a kind of COVID 2.0 for them. They are facing tariffs on items we either don't grow or make in the United States, and realistically never will, for things like coffee or green tea. They are shouting from the rooftop that Trump is single-handedly detonating a mass extinction event for small businesses in America. And listen, few people understand better than our ports that you don't need these tariffs to last very long for them to have a very big impact. Fewer ships from across the Pacific means less cargo at our ports. Less cargo at our ports means less goods for our truckers to transport. And that ultimately means bare shelves for our retailers and the American consumer. Now, even if you assume the most optimistic outlook that Trump is going to cut amazing new trade deals with everyone he's burned, which he won't, there will still be a painful cost from the shock to the economy that has already been set in motion. Supply chains do not reset in an instant. The time to reverse these Republican tariffs was the same day they were announced. Just 3 Republicans chose to support Senator Wyden's resolution yesterday, with the majority blocking that bill. That is a dangerous and deliberate decision by Republicans to enable Trump's pro-recession agenda and higher taxes on every American. And for every day that Republicans choose to allow Trump to sabotage the economy, more small businesses will continue to suffer. Businesses in Washington state are already having to take cost-cutting measures. They're laying off employees. Some may even close for good. For what? There's no strategy here. It's short-term pain for long-term pain. This entire debacle is already a prime example of self-inflicted economic arson. No one wins here. Republicans need to cut their losses and work with Democrats immediately to end this tax on consumers and stop these nonsense trade wars. Congress needs to take the matches away from the president who is setting fire to the economy. So Democrats are going to make sure that Republicans continue to feel the pressure until this Congress takes action and overrides this president. So with that, I want to turn it over to Senator Wyden. He has been a leader in our efforts to rein in Trump's tariffs. Senator Wyden.
Thank you very much, Senator Murray, for all of your leadership. And I think that it's very important that you brought together 3 key Western states, with Washington, Oregon, and California teaming up. And let me just touch on a few issues because I think you got us off to a very strong start as usual. We saw devastating data for the American economy yesterday, and that should have been enough for Republican senators last night to vote to end what I call poisonous Trump tariffs. The only winner from last night was China, which now can go out and scoop up markets and allies because Donald Trump has left everybody pretty much in the dust. We are not going to drop our battle after last night's tie vote. We are already working to mobilize so that we make clear that we are going to stay on the job here, particularly under the Constitution. We're given the job, and we're going to stay at it until we prevail and rid America and the world of these across-the-board flawed tax cuts. Now, a lot of the attention this afternoon, I gather, will be on the stream of goods coming into our ports drying up. And this is a major problem for every area that has a port community that depends on those jobs. So I thought what I'd do for a few minutes before we bring California into this is to focus on how the tariffs are hitting our Northwest and Western exports. The goods being located on trucks and ships at our port and sold to markets overseas. Oregon, even more than Washington and California, depends on selling our products overseas. In 2024, Oregon was one of a small number, just 11 states, that actually have a trade surplus in goods. What that means, not in trade lingo, but just plain old English, is we export more than we import. Exports are 10% of the state's GDP, sixth highest. Now, something like every 4 or 5 jobs in Oregon depends on international trade. And the trade jobs often pay better because they contain a higher value added kind of component. Speaking with small businesses and workers all over Oregon last week, when I had a big group of town hall meetings, every single one warned of damage from tariffs in the near future. Small businesses are 88% of our state's exporters. One of the things that was striking is a maritime industry insider shared that over 1/3 of the vessels leaving Oregon ports are carrying grain, much of which is consumed by China. With the reciprocal tariffs, these are exactly the kinds of sales that are in jeopardy. Officials at Bob's Red Mill, which is legendary for its outstanding flour, told me their orders overseas are already beginning to dry up. Oregon grass seed growers estimate that about half of their exports, nearly 200 million in sales, are being canceled thanks to, again, the Trump taxes and the Trump tariffs, because they're really the same thing. The same goes for the electronics manufacturers, vehicle parts manufacturers, and other major employers in Oregon. China buys more than 15% of all our state's exports. All of those sales are going away thanks to Trump's trade war. So with that, Senator Murray, you've got Oregon and Washington speaking out, but we have our friend from California, Senator Padilla, who's been a great addition to our Western coalition. And Senator, why don't we go to you, Senator Padilla?
Okay. Well, thank you, Senator Wyden, and thank you, Senator Murray, for pulling us all together. It's great to work in partnership with you on these, not just important issues, but obviously critical and urgent issues. I want to thank in advance Mario Cordero, CEO of the Port of Long Beach, who you'll be hearing from here in a few minutes, for lending his important sort of on-the-ground impact perspective to this conversation, for all the great work that he does at the port each and every day. Now, for those who may not know, the state of California is home to 2 of the largest ports in the country, 2 of the largest and busiest ports in the country. The ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach alone, so not counting Oakland, San Francisco, San Diego, and others, the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach alone receive 40% of our nation's imports. Together, they make up a keystone for the success of not just the regional economy or the state economy, but truly our nation's economy. And so that's why these past few weeks, the whiplash and the rhetoric around these unnecessary tariff wars have been so concerning. We're beginning to hear from our local folks on the West Coast. I mean, the Port of Los Angeles alone has publicly said that they expect imports to drop by about 35% in 2 weeks' time if everything stays as has been stated, with the Port of Long Beach making a similar forecast and projection. So the San Pedro Bay ports combined are the blinking red lights for our nation's economy. So think about what that drop in cargo would mean. You know, it's not just a slowdown in activity at the ports. For consumers, it'll mean a high likelihood of shelves not being stocked. Imagine consumers going into stores and finding empty shelves. We know already that even the threat of tariffs, and certainly once tariffs are in effect, it's going to mean higher prices, higher costs for importers passed on to consumers. That is what we can expect. And undoubtedly, it's only a matter of time before more Americans will be out of work. So America has to get ready to feel the full pain of Trump's tariffs unless we can get him to reverse course, or our Republican colleagues for that matter. Because while today it may be the Western ports that are already feeling the impact, it's only a matter of weeks before similar impacts are felt on the East Coast or along the Gulf Coast. In the Senate, as you've heard, we've been proudly working together with my Democratic colleagues to vote to undo Trump's reckless tariffs and to protect our economy. But just yesterday, Senate Republicans voted to keep Trump's tariffs in place. That was the net effect of their vote. So as long as House and Senate Republicans are more faithful to the president and his desires than they are to his own constituents and to our nation's economy and our national security, we have to shed light on what's going on and tell the American public where the responsibility lies when the pain comes and when the economy further declines. The first quarter has already seen a shrinking of the economy because of Trump's policies and his rhetoric. But we're here now with the urgent plea because it is not too late. If we were to turn back now, we can avoid some of the most severe devastation. But every day that Donald Trump fails to reverse course, America moves closer to a recession of Donald Trump's making, plain and simple. We can avoid it. We should avoid it. And that's why we're here today. So with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce the Commissioner of the Port of Seattle, Ryan Calkins.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. I'm actually coming to you live from Norfolk Airport in Virginia, where a group of us ports have gathered this week to try to generate additional business for our ports, including the Port of Long Beach. Today, I just want to emphasize that for us ports, we have, over the last 75 years, benefited from expanding global trade, which has been driven by the United States. And that expanded global trade has resulted in much greater prosperity and quality of life for Americans, not only because we're able to access goods coming from global markets, things that we can't produce or grow in the United States, but also because we've opened new markets for Americans, meaning Americans have an opportunity to export our goods. And the senators have addressed a few of the issues on the West Coast that we see are critically important. Port of Seattle is a major agricultural exporter, and when imports are frozen because of these tariffs, it means that we also don't have an opportunity to export those agricultural goods. So our farmers in the inland Northwest and inland California aren't able to reach their markets as well. So we are excited to hear that there are efforts underway at the grassroots level to turn over these tariffs, to end this trade dispute. We know that over the long term, continued international trade is absolutely essential to growth and prosperity and quality of life for the American people, and in particular on the West Coast, where we are especially dependent upon trade for our economies. We are anxious to get beyond this and move back towards global growth and opening. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to one of my colleagues at the Port of Tacoma, Commissioner Marzano.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Senator, for putting this together. One of the things the ports do that is critical for our economic vitality is creating family wage jobs. And what has been happening is we'll see in longshore truckers, warehouse workers, slowly starting to lose man hours with regards to the international trade tariffs that have taken place. We're even seeing exports from our docks being moved by the producers looking for new customers because they are not able to sell their goods. Less containers are now coming on our vessels. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's going to get worse unless we can change dramatically. But one of the things that's concerning to all of us is the fact that this won't happen overnight. This is not a light switch. They can just turn it on and off. The uncertainty our small and medium-sized businesses are having are whether or not they're even going to be able to stay in business throughout the year. This takes years to establish customers, and it gives China an opportunity to look for other ways and encroach upon what we've established for years to come. We're looking for other markets to help offset this. But this hurts everybody. It's not just us here in Washington or along the West Coast, but throughout the nation. We help serve the nation. And it's critically important that we have the representatives in Washington, D.C. look at this in a serious manner because they're going to hurt their own people that they represent. So I thank you for what everybody is doing, trying to stop this. But once again, it's going to be devastating if we don't turn this corner right away. It will only get worse. We've seen that in the past. This will be a lot worse. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to Mario from the Port of Southern California.
And Senator Ron Wyden, I appreciate all the work you and your colleagues have done to support America's ports, as we are the key drivers of jobs and the economy. I appreciate the opportunity to join you to offer the Port of Long Beach perspective. Last year, the Port of Long Beach moved cargo valued at more than $300 billion to and from every congressional district. We moved the most containerized cargo of any American port in the first 3 months of 2025. And this activity directly supports 2.7 million jobs throughout the country. But with the current trade landscape, as the month of May begins, we are entering the period when the San Pedro Bay complex will shift suddenly from cargo surges to cargo reduction. Our forecast shows that we will see a sudden slowdown in trade. Shipping lines have already canceled 34 sailings that would have called at the Port of Long Beach over the next 2 months. We expect more than a 30% drop in the imports in May. Whatever downturn in cargo we experience will be in stark contrast to the first part of the year, when the specter of new tariffs pushed shippers to and front load their cargo shipments, leading to a record first quarter 2025 for the Port of Long Beach and boosting Long Beach as the busiest U.S. port. But after a robust first quarter, the current tariffs between the U.S. and China will diminish cargo volume. In addition to imports, Long Beach is a major export gateway for our farmers and ranchers, not just those in California. We also handle agricultural exports such as meat, cotton, nuts, and produce from southern and Midwestern states. And after a healthy April, the tariffs between the U.S. and China are expected to slow cargo volume. China accounts for about 60% of imports at the Port of Long Beach and about 20% of exports. In the short term, consumers will start finding fewer choices and higher prices on the shelves. And if you're one of the millions of Americans whose job depends on cargo moving through the Port of Long Beach, are workers in longshore, truckers, logistic workers, retailers, farmers, and factory workers, any sort of long-term sustained downturn in shipments caused by the tariff will be detrimental to the job market. Companies are going to be moving less cargo and will have less work for their workforce throughout the supply chain. It's an effect that will be felt far beyond the docks. As we monitor the changing dynamics of trade, we want to make sure that decision makers and the public understand how vital trade is to our economy, to American businesses and families. It's a wake-up call for consumers, and it's a time of radical uncertainty for the business sector. Still, I'm hoping the underlying issues can be worked out. I am optimistic. For the Port of Long Beach, we are leading the world in innovation, modernizing our port to manage growth, increasing connectivity to hubs throughout the nation. We have a $3.2 billion investment in port modernization projects planned for the next 10 years. These upgrades will improve to increase safety and efficiency of the flow of cargo and reduce impacts to our communities. I'm grateful for the senators here for their leadership highlighting this issue, and I'm confident that the White House and Congress all recognize the significance of these issues and are working to resolve them to ensure America's economy can continue to thrive. Thank you so much.
All right. I see Paul from Seattle Times has a question up. If you can raise your hand to the reporters in the room, we'll take questions. I am hearing that Senator Wyden and Senator Padilla have to leave soon. So if you have questions with Oregon and California in mind, would recommend those folks asking first. Okay.
Senator Murray, I have just one quick point to add because I think your press conference could not be more timely. And let me explain to our friends from the West what happened, because it was really unusual. We had initially a tie vote, and the vice president, Mr. Vance, had to come in his limousine to basically break the tie and save the flawed tariff policy of his boss. In other words, we had just gone through a day when the American people were seeing this devastating data about all the parts of the American economy that were contracting, and senators came to the floor and they had to decide, were they going to vote what their constituents want, which was to replace these tariffs, or were they more worried that Donald Trump was going to be mean to them? And then J.D. Vance came in and broke the tie, and with one vote, he saved his boss's flawed problems to live to operate for another day. And I just wanted to say that with Senator Murray's leadership, because Senator Padilla and I work closely with her, and she's a leader of our caucus, we are not giving up. We are making a commitment today that we are going to stay at it, because we cannot, given the importance of trade in the West, we cannot say that's that. Quite the opposite. We're going to stay at it until we get the changes that we heard are so important, Senator Murray and Senator Padilla, from all these good people that were speaking. And I'll look forward to working with all of you in the days ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, Senator. We'll take a question from Lauren Nelson with the LA Times.
Hi, this question is for Senator Padilla. You mentioned that these tariffs are leading to higher costs for importers that are passed on to consumers. I'm hoping you can speak briefly to which specific industries, which specific California businesses you're hearing about that are already seeing immediate impacts. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can track it in some of the economic data that's already out. I mean, I can tell you one already, just not as a senator, but as a father of 3 growing boys. Cost of bananas has jumped at the grocery store. So it is everything from food to electronics to cars and clothing, different percentages for different products, but it's there. You know, I think another point worth making before I have to excuse myself, and I didn't do this in my opening remarks, is I've been receiving different industry representatives in my office over the last couple of weeks. And one of the meetings that really stands out was a coalition of growers from the Central Valley in California who depend on export markets in China, other parts of Asia, India, and beyond. And the dynamic that they reminded me of is, look, for folks in other countries that have imported United States goods, if we're no longer doing that because of these tariff wars, unnecessary tariff wars, they're going to find that product somewhere else. They will backfill from other markets in other countries. And once they do that, right, if Donald Trump has a change of heart, changes his tune in 2 months, because we're well into the 90 days, they're not going to immediately just pivot back to the United States and their prior suppliers. It will take time. And in the meantime, once again, American companies who export are going to continue to suffer, lesser sales, lesser revenues, not be able to invest in their company, not be able to invest in expanding and growing, certainly not be able to invest in hiring more people. So that's an important dynamic, I think, that we haven't touched on.
Okay, Laura, assuming no follow-up, so we'll go to Paul with the Seattle Times.
Thanks. So I guess I was looking, Commissioner Calkins, if we could get a little, like a data point or two about what the ports are already seeing in terms of lower demand, and based on the cancellations and blank sailings that you're seeing, and then when does the port expect to see the real effects striking? We've heard sort of generally mid-May, and I just wonder if you have any updates on that.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Thanks for the question. And I think you're aware of our nwseaportalliance.com website, where we have a dashboard you can track vessel calls, vessel blank sailings, even things down to granular data like gate operations and things like that. So at any time, you can go check that and see the most up-to-date information that we have publicly available. What we are hearing is that the greatest impact is going to start in the last half of May. Right now, we're anticipating, we have 2 ships at berth. We anticipate 7 total next week. But we're seeing that further out, that those numbers are going to be similar to what CEO Cordero mentioned for the Port of Long Beach, and I believe Senator Padilla mentioned about Port of LA, the report we heard out of Port of LA earlier today. So similar numbers, 40% reduction, and also at the total container volume looks to be reduced per ship too.
All right, and then follow up real quickly, as has already been discussed today, that has effects in terms of the amount of labor required. What are you sort of anticipating? What is the port sort of anticipating around there, or broadly speaking, what can we sort of expect?
So the labor gangs that come out to serve the ships from the longshore are called on a per ship basis, and so they coordinate the carriers coordinate with the terminal operators to determine how many longshore workers will be needed to unload a ship. So if there are fewer vessel calls, fewer gangs are called out. If there are fewer containers on the ship, maybe there'd be fewer gangs or fewer workers per gang, fewer cranes operating. That then ripples out to the number of drayage truck drivers who are coming to the terminals to drop off and pick up containers. So, it's probably a pretty direct one-to-one ratio. If we've got a 40% drop in vessel calls or container traffic, we're going to have a roughly equivalent drop in the number of longshore hours, the number of truck trips. And keep in mind that those truckers, most of them are independent operators, and they are paid on a per trip basis. It's not an hourly job. They're paid by the trip. And so if there are fewer trips to make, it means fewer opportunities for their paycheck. And of course, the ecosystem around ports is based on the same thing. You've got warehouses and logistics operations that are functioning based on the volumes at the ports. So yeah, it will ripple out through the whole economy in our port communities.
Thank you.
All right, and then we'll go to Courtney Brown with Axios.
Hello. Thanks so much for doing this. Hugely helpful for some color for all of us reporters that are writing about trade and tariffs right now. I have a question. I think it was you, Ryan, who mentioned that you were in Norfolk in an effort to generate additional business for your ports. What does that mean in practice? Are you meeting with other countries trying to gin up demand for U.S. goods, or can you clarify how you would be spinning up business for your port?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Courtney. So just this week, the Northwest Seaport Alliance we had a commissioner in Vietnam, which we see as over the last few years, particularly since the first round of Trump tariffs, Vietnam has been a key target for West Coast ports for additional cargo volume as we diversify away from China. We have seen increasing numbers of interest in Cambodia and India, for instance. We also this week have a business development delegation in Korea led by a couple of our commissioners there as well. So we are literally going to countries where we believe that we can create new business to try to generate additional trade between us and those countries. I'm on the East Coast this week for a conference that would focus on breakbulk cargo, new energy cargo that could be moved through ports. And here, along with the Port of Long Beach, that's been a real leader in the potential development of energy cargo, renewable energy cargo in particular, things like large wind turbine blades and large transformers for reconductoring the grid. So there's a lot of work outside of just containers, the boxes we see on there, that we're trying to pursue as well.
Got it. And just quick follow-up question, I guess. I mean, can you tell us how those talks are going at all? I'm curious how willing some of these countries would be to sign on to buy more US goods with the trade tariff situation so in flux still. I mean, Vietnam, these are countries with pretty big reciprocal rates on them. I know those are frozen, but there's no guarantee that they will stay that way.
No, I think you're exactly right. It feels like everything is in limbo. Everything is, so all conversations are conditional upon some sort of resolution of this trade dispute. And so, yeah, we're having to play the long game here in hopes that either Trump comes to his senses or Congress and the Republicans in Congress are willing to check his power that he's pulled away from Congress so that we can reduce these tariffs and get back to much more freer flow of goods and services between the United States and elsewhere. But in the meantime, it makes it much, much harder to try to negotiate new opportunities for business at our ports.
All right. And next we have a question from Zachary with NBC 16.
Hi, good morning or afternoon, I guess, depending on where you find yourself. If Senator Murray is still available or any of the other senators, I have a question about what levers of power you folks have at the moment. The commissioner just spoke briefly about wanting either President Trump to come to his senses or for Republicans in Congress to rein in his power. The American people haven't had much optimism in either of those two things happening unprompted. What sorts of levers of power do Democrats have left, if not waiting till the midterm election, to make one of those two things happen in order to stop this from getting any more out of hand?
Zachary, I am here, and thank you very much for that question. First of all, Congress does have the power to approve tariffs if we pass legislation that requires us to do that. There is legislation out there right now. It has some Republican co-sponsors. We need a lot more. The legislation that we tried to pass last night, we were denied that by the vice president coming to break the tie, so we lost on that vote. But I think that more of our Republican colleagues are becoming extremely worried about just what we're talking about today, that we have decreased product coming into this country, which means empty shelves and higher prices because of these trade wars. And we are seeing our domestic manufacturers and growers losing their markets overseas. This is very damaging to our economy. That is going to hit home to a lot of our Republican colleagues in their home states over the next month or two. We said last night we can't wait for the horrific impacts to hit. We need to act now. We were rebuffed, but we do have ways to pass legislation to put the hands back in Congress to oversee tariffs.
All right, and we've got a question from freightwaves.com that's written out. So I'll just go ahead and read it. For the port executives, have you been stepping up your efforts to capture more export business, perhaps outside the usual, to keep dock workers and truckers working?
Yes, and that's a great question. For the Port of Long Beach, not only have we stepped it up, but again, we've been doing that all along. Keep in mind that, again, the supply chain, if you go back to COVID-19, obviously, we're prepared for unprecedented events, unforeseen events that occur. So the answer to the question is yes, And I think it's more important today because the elevation of exports, particularly for the state of California, as I mentioned in my opening comments, is crucial. And of course, part of this dynamic of the tariff objective, part of that is to address the trade imbalance. That's going to be a big challenge. But the answer to your question, absolutely, we're stepping up our efforts with regard to emerging markets and conversations that we're having with exporters.
All right, and Stuart, I don't know if you have a follow-up, but feel free to unmute yourself. We'll do a last call for any questions. If you can't figure out the raise your hand function, just go ahead and unmute yourself. Let us know your name and outlet.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I would ask the other port execs the same questions: is how important is it to keep truckers working and warehouse workers working and that kind of thing? And you might go outside of your comfort zone when it comes to certain export type shipments that you would be looking at, because I've heard with other ports that they've been, willing to take almost anything if they are prepared to handle it.
Is that question for Long Beach?
Yeah, of course, okay. and for the other executives.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the numbers tell you by every account, consumer spending is a big paramount a percentile of our GDP. So workers need to work, whether it's dock workers, truckers, and anybody in the logistic industry, because again, the more you augment that spending ability by this sector, it's not only good for the local economy, but for the regional economy. So I think, again, with the statistics that you're hearing, including the fact that, for example, the UBS economists have just indicated that they expect a 20% reduction in imports to the United States. So this is not just a West Coast issue. It affects every port, whether it's in the East or in the Gulf. So I think, again, obviously, from our perspective, given the numbers in terms of what we say, direct or indirect jobs that come from the Port of Long Beach, it's vital that at all sectors we keep employment at a very robust number.
Thank you. And if I could follow up for the Northwest Seaport Alliance very quickly, we're looking at all avenues to open up markets with our exports. Eastern Washington, we're looking at India, Vietnam, like Ryan had talked about, other markets that we can get into. It's critically important. And I want to give one quick example to show how bad the tariffs did hurt us back in the very first administration he had. In 2018, our Apple products, we exported 11,000 containers. And when the tariffs hit in the first administration, those 11,000 went down to 360. That gives you just an idea of the impacts that tariffs have, taxes have with regard to our export market. We're now up to 3,700, still trying to grow that market, but it takes a long time to get to where we were.
All right. Last call for questions. Paul with the Seattle Times. I see your hand is still raised. I want to make sure that you don't have a follow-up.
Yeah, thanks. Real quick follow-up on that last comment from the Tacoma commissioner. Was that out of Tacoma or from the Alliance broadly?
It was from both our gateway, both Tacoma and
okay.
Seattle.
Okay, and then talk, and I'd like to hear any port officials here about, it's the Christmas buying season for a lot of retailers, and I'm just curious what your anticipation is. Like, where are we in that window for buying, typically, and what sort of effects are you hearing about?
That's a very good question, and I think the reason for the press conference, peak season begins around July. So our shippers now have to have certainty and clarity in terms of what the policies are, because again, we have a very short window. So right now I could represent to you that in speaking to our customers, there are shippers who are not releasing the imports from the various ports of origin because they do not want to be subject to a tariff number or percentile that might change. So I think in the coming months, more specifically in the next 2 months, is going to be very key to make sure we have clarity with regard to this tariff issue so that the business sector and the shippers could feel comfort. And now moving forward with the required orders that are going to have to be made like in the next 30 days to get ready for the peak season, which basically means, back to school products, the holiday season, and of course, as we move towards the fourth quarter. So these decisions had to be made real quick within the next 30 to 60 days.
Okay, then are there any vessels at any of these ports on the West Coast that are that are being essentially held, that are not being unloaded, or containers that are not being picked up because of tariffs that are already in place?
Well, I could tell you that from the ports of origin, that is from Asia, that is the case. There are imports that are being held up. Now, in terms of exports that are being held up, of course, again, that dynamic is across the board because when you have, at least as of right now, a tariff, retaliatory tariff by China, more specifically, if you're an exporter, you're going to think twice about any kind of export market at this time with a high percentile of what we're looking at, whether it's 145% tax on Chinese imports or 124% on tax on exports going to China. So again, we're at a point of inflection with regard to these dynamics, both on imports and exports.
Thank you.
And Paul, there are, around each port, there's a system of bonded warehouses where goods can go before they clear customs, and we're hearing that those bonded warehouses are basically full at this point.
Okay, and all right, so I guess that was part of my question too. If stuff's being sort of held up while people are thinking, do I want to pay this or can I afford to?
Yeah, I think that it's fair to say that that is the case. One other thing about the warehouse inventory question, keep in mind that what we hear from a lot of beneficial cargo owners, they're only stocked up for the next 6 to 8 weeks. So that's going to be depleting in a very short window of time. So we need to kind of get back to some normalcy with regard to the movement of not only imports, but exports. Otherwise, you're going to have empty shelves.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, and then we have a question from Laura Nelson with LA Times.
Yes, hi, it's me again. This question is for the Port of LA. You mentioned that, for Long Beach, I'm sorry. You mentioned that the shipping lines, you've seen a 30% cancellation for May. Can you talk us through a little bit more any trends in terms of which ports of origin or countries canceled the most shipments? And kind of relatedly, how far out are you booking those shipments, and how quickly could the port pivot if these tariffs were to change? Thank you.
Well, in terms of the canceled sailings, right now we're looking as to far out as to June. We have the data that, again, for Port of Long Beach, as I may have indicated, there's been 34 canceled sailings. I suspect that if we continue the status quo in terms of this uncertainty, those canceled sailings will move into the months of July and August. So I think, again, it's going to be very crucial for us now to make sure that we give some comfort not only to the beneficial cargo owners, the ports of origin, the carriers, that we need to get back to some at least certainty. And I think that's what the customer is asking in terms of, at the end of the day, some clarity and certainty with regard to the various commodities that are going to be key, not only for business, but for the consumer.
Thanks. So just to follow up on that, the 34 canceled sailings, are those coming from a handful of countries in Asia, or can you give us a better sense of where those shippers are?
Well, for the San Pedro Bay complex and the Port of Long Beach, primarily it's Asia, more specifically China. So I think whether it's Vietnam or whether it's China, I think some of those canceled sailings are affecting both China and Southeast Asia. But again, the major commodity or major imports that comes into this complex is from China.
All right, and we'll take a last question from Courtney with Axios.
Yeah, hi, sorry. It's just a very quick follow-up question to something you said, Mario. I think you answered this, but I just want to be clear. When you say that shippers are not releasing imports from the ports of origin, are you saying that they're just sitting on the water, or they're going into these bonded warehouses? What do you mean by that?
I'm talking about the warehouses within the ports of origin. The canceled sailings are really a metric that we're representing that the vessels are not going to leave at the port of origin. They're just canceled. So I think, again, in terms of the commodities that in the last couple of weeks have come in to the San Pedro Bay complex, I think you're seeing a reduction of vessels, that's for sure. But I think the concern here and the real concern here is we don't want to keep that metric going in the wrong way. I'm talking about whether it's vessel calls or loss of import volume.
Thank you.
All right, I'll just turn it back over to Senator Murray for any closing thoughts.
I just think that, you are seeing that this whole chaotic discussion about how we are going to deal with this issue is already impacting Americans. I know it's impacting our small businesses. We're certainly seeing the alarm bells screaming at us from our ports, and it is critical that Congress take back control of this and make sure we have certainty going forward. And that's what we will continue to work on, but we do not have it yet.
All right, that concludes today's press call. It was recorded and will be distributed widely. Thank you to everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.